The morning began like most others since I retired, slow and unremarkable. I shuffled into the kitchen with bare feet on the cool tile, inhaling the faint aroma of yesterday's coffee grounds still clinging to the pot. Diane, my wife of 35 years, had already left. She'd taken to early mornings lately, something about new routines keeping her fresh. I didn't mind at first. It gave me time to savor the silence, to enjoy the solitude I'd come to realize I liked more than I expected. But the stillness, once comforting, began to feel heavy, like a vacuum where warmth used to be. As I prepared my toast, the faint hum of the radio filled the background, blending seamlessly with the creak of the house settling into its aging frame. I flipped through a few old photos spread across the table. Diane had left them out last week, likely with the intention of organizing them. Our lives were scattered across glossy prints, smiling vacations, the kids' milestones, birthday cakes, and holiday dinners. I paused on one, a picture from our 20th anniversary, Diane and me at a beachside restaurant, her hand resting on mine. She was glowing that night. I remember thinking I was the luckiest man alive. I shook my head and chuckled to myself. Sentimentality had been creeping up on me more often these days. Retirement had a way of sharpening the edges of your memories, forcing you to see what was good and what had slipped through the cracks. As I sipped my coffee, the phone buzzed from the counter, jolting me out of my thoughts. Diane had left it behind. It wasn't unusual. She could be forgetful, often distracted by her ever-expanding social calendar. The message on the lock screen read, "Let me know when you're free. I miss you." No name, just a phone number. I stared at it for a moment, unsure what to think. Was it one of her friends? A relative? I considered ignoring it but found my thumb hovering over the screen instead. Unlocking her phone felt wrong, intrusive, but curiosity pricked at me. The innocuous message hung in the air like a riddle I couldn't leave unsolved. I set the phone back down and stepped away, rubbing the back of my neck. The toast popped up from the toaster, and I busied myself with buttering it, trying to dismiss the slight knot forming in my stomach. People send messages like that all the time. It could mean anything. Still, as I sat down with my plate, my eyes kept drifting back to the phone. Diane's absence, though routine, suddenly felt different, heavier. Her day had been mapped out like all her others. Yoga at 8, errands in town, and some sort of committee meeting at noon. Yet now, I found myself questioning the certainty of it all. "Let me know when you're free. I miss you." The words looped in my head as I chewed my toast, its buttery warmth doing nothing to settle the unease rising in my chest. Later that day, I tried to distract myself. I went to the shed to tinker with an old bike I'd been meaning to fix, but my hands worked mechanically, my thoughts elsewhere. Diane had always been a social butterfly, her calendar full even when the kids were young. She thrived on human connection, while I preferred the quiet. It worked well for us, though I sometimes felt like a supporting character in the busy play of her life. I remembered her mentioning a yoga friend, Rachel, who joined her morning sessions recently. Maybe the message was from her. Friends text like that all the time, don't they? But then why no name saved to the number? And why did the words feel intimate? By the time Diane returned home in the early evening, I had resolved to play it cool. She came in with her usual burst of energy, carrying a bag of groceries and a bouquet of fresh flowers. Her smile was radiant, but something about it felt rehearsed, like a reflex rather than genuine warmth. "Hey, Han," she chirped, placing the flowers on the counter. "I thought these would brighten up the place." "They're nice," I replied, watching her closely as she unpacked the groceries. "How was yoga?" "Great. Rachel's really pushing us lately, but I feel amazing afterward. You should join sometime." She winked, but her suggestion felt hollow, like she already knew I'd say no. As she bustled around the kitchen, I noticed her phone still sitting on the counter, untouched since morning. She hadn't even realized she'd left it behind. I waited for her to glance at it, to check for missed messages, but she didn't. "You left your phone here all day," I said casually, gesturing to it. "Oh." She barely looked up. "Thanks for letting me know." The nonchalance in her voice grated at me. Didn't she care who might have tried to reach her? Did she know about the message and was trying to play it off? "Someone texted you," I added, testing the waters. She froze for the briefest moment before resuming her work. Probably Rachel, she said lightly. She's always checking in. Could be, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. The message said, I miss you. Diane turned to me then, her smile faltering for the first time. It was fleeting, but I caught it. A flicker of something. Guilt? Annoyance? Her eyes met mine briefly before she laughed. That sounds like her. She's clingy like that. Her explanation was reasonable enough, but the seed of doubt had been planted. I watched as she picked up her phone and quickly swiped through it, her movements hurried, almost anxious. Everything okay? I asked. Of course, she said, her voice overly bright. Just catching up on what I missed. She excused herself to take a shower, leaving me alone with the groceries and the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. That night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I couldn't focus. Diane laughed at the sitcom playing on the screen, but I wasn't sure if her laughter was genuine or just part of the routine. I glanced at her, searching for cracks in her facade, but she looked as relaxed as ever. Maybe I was overthinking. Retirement had left me with too much time to fill, and my mind had started creating problems where none existed. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Diane's soft breaths filled the room, the unease wouldn't let go. The next morning, Diane was up and out early again. Her day packed with more activities I didn't quite understand. I wandered through the house, the silence now suffocating. I opened the fridge to grab some milk and noticed a sticky note on the door in Diane's handwriting. Lunch with Rachel at noon. Back by 3. Something about the note felt staged, like it was meant to reassure me preemptively. But why would she feel the need to do that unless? The phone call came at 1:30. It wasn't Diane. It was Rachel. Hi, Mark, she said cheerily. Can you tell Diane I'm running late for yoga tomorrow? The days that followed Rachel's phone call were a blur of quiet observation and mounting unease. I wanted to believe Diane's explanation, to let her bright smile and easy demeanor soothe the whispers of doubt that had taken root in my mind. But the cracks were there, faint at first, but unmistakable once you knew where to look. And now, I couldn't unsee them. It started with small things. Diane's yoga mat, usually stuffed into the corner of the closet by the end of the week, was missing. I hadn't seen her carrying it out of the house lately either. I told myself she might have left it at the studio, a plausible explanation, but when I casually asked her about yoga over dinner that night, she frowned slightly, like she was struggling to recall the details of her own story. Same old stretches, she replied. Rachel's been pushing us into more advanced poses, though. My legs are killing me. Have you been practicing at home? I asked, careful to sound disinterested. She laughed. Are you kidding? I'm too tired to move by the time I get back. The lie was almost imperceptible, but I felt it. My gut twisted as I nodded along, letting her change the subject to something more benign. One afternoon, I found myself standing in our bedroom, folding laundry while Diane was out. She'd left in a hurry that morning, muttering something about an errand downtown, and the silence of the house was deafening. I worked methodically, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling, but my hands froze when I came across an unfamiliar scarf in her drawer. It was silk, deep burgundy with gold embroidery, a stunning piece. But Diane didn't wear scarves, not like this. Her wardrobe leaned toward comfort and practicality, rarely the kind of thing you'd find in a boutique. I held it up, inspecting it like it might reveal a clue. A gift, maybe? But if it were a gift, why hadn't she mentioned it? I placed the scarf back where I found it, careful not to disturb anything else. It was probably nothing. Maybe it belonged to one of her friends, borrowed for some reason I couldn't fathom. Still, the thought nagged at me. Later that week, Diane's phone buzzed on the counter again. She was in the shower, the water's rhythmic drumming echoing down the hall. The message lit up the screen, and I tried to ignore it, but my eyes betrayed me. Tomorrow. Can't wait to see you. No name, just a number again. My chest tightened as I stared at the message, willing myself not to jump to conclusions. Friends text like that, don't they? Maybe it was Rachel or someone from her committee. Yet the words felt too familiar, too warm. I set the phone down and walked away, trying to calm the storm brewing in my mind. Diane's laughter floated out from the bathroom a few minutes later, light and carefree, as if nothing was amiss. It made my unease feel absurd, like I was fabricating problems out of thin air. By Friday, I'd almost convinced myself that I was overthinking everything. Diane had been radiant all week, her charm and warmth as disarming as ever. She'd even suggested a weekend getaway, just the two of us, to reconnect. "It's been ages since we've done something spontaneous," she said, grinning over her glass of wine at dinner. "How about the lake house? No phones, no distractions, just us." It was a tempting offer, one I wanted to embrace wholeheartedly, but the timing struck me as odd. Was it a genuine attempt to rekindle our bond, or a calculated move to deflect suspicion? I agreed nonetheless, hoping to find clarity in the quiet of the lakeside retreat. But my hopes were dashed before the weekend even began. Saturday morning, while packing for the trip, I noticed Diane's overnight bag sitting by the front door. She was upstairs, grabbing a few last-minute items, and I figured I'd help by loading her bag into the car. As I picked it up, something shifted inside, a small, metallic clink. Curiosity prickled at me, and before I could stop myself, I unzipped the bag. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary. Clothes neatly folded, toiletries in a compact case. But tucked into the side pocket was a bottle of perfume I didn't recognize. It was a bold scent, heavier and more sensual than the light floral fragrances Diane usually wore. Alongside it was a pair of black stilettos, sleek and unfamiliar. Diane had always been practical with her footwear, opting for comfort over style, especially on trips like this. My pulse quickened as I dug deeper, finding a sheer lace negligee buried beneath her clothes. I stared at it, my mind racing. Diane and I hadn't been intimate in weeks, her schedule always leaving her too tired or distracted. So why pack something so provocative? I zipped the bag shut, my hands trembling. Rationality warred with suspicion in my head. Maybe she was trying to surprise me, reignite the spark we'd lost. But another part of me, the part that had been quietly piecing together inconsistencies, whispered a darker truth. The weekend away was tense. Diane seemed oblivious to my unease, chatting about her plans for the week ahead and reminiscing about the early days of our marriage. I smiled and nodded in all the right places, but my thoughts were elsewhere, dissecting every detail of her behavior. By the time we returned home, I was no closer to understanding the truth. Diane had been perfect, too perfect, as if she sensed my doubts and was determined to smother them with affection. But the moment of reckoning came that evening. Diane went to bed early, claiming exhaustion from the trip. I stayed up, restless and unsettled. On a whim, I decided to check her car, something I'd avoided out of respect for her privacy. But now, respect felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. In the glove compartment, I found a receipt from a hotel downtown. The date matched one of the days Diane had claimed to be at a charity luncheon. The room number was scrawled in the corner, along with a name I didn't recognize, James R. My hands shook as I held the receipt, the weight of its implications crashing down on me. There was no rationalizing this, no innocent explanation that could make sense of it. Diane's lies, her subtle shifts in behavior, the scarf, the messages, it all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. My wife was living a life I didn't recognize, and I was no longer a part of it. Sunday morning arrived heavy with quiet tension. Diane moved through the house with the fluid grace of someone at ease, humming softly as she made breakfast. I watched her from the doorway, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. The receipt burned in my pocket like a hidden wound, every crinkle of the paper a reminder of the questions I couldn't yet bring myself to ask. "Everything okay, Mark?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. Her tone was light, her smile unforced. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined it all. The missing yoga mat, the odd messages, the bag filled with items meant for someone else. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." Diane nodded and turned back to the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. I wanted to ask her about the hotel receipt, to throw it on the counter and demand an explanation. But a part of me hesitated, fearful of what her answer might be. What if I'd misunderstood? What if the name and the room number meant nothing? The fear of being wrong was almost as paralyzing as the fear of being right. After breakfast, I called my brother Tom, a man who had always been a steadying presence in my life. His no-nonsense approach to problems often bordered on bluntness, but today I needed that. "Mark, haven't heard from you in a while," he said warmly. "Yeah, I've been busy," I replied, struggling to find the right words. "Listen, I need your opinion on something. It's, about Diane." Tom's voice immediately softened. "What's going on?" I hesitated, pacing the length of the living room. "She's been acting different. I don't know. There are these little things that don't add up, like she's hiding something. And I found a hotel receipt with another man's name on it." Tom whistled low. "That's heavy, Mark. Have you talked to her?" "No. I don't even know where to start. What if I'm wrong? And what if you're right?" Tom countered gently. "You've been married to Diane for decades. You know her better than anyone. Trust your gut, but don't let it eat you alive. Confront her, or dig deeper if you need proof. But don't sit on this. It'll tear you apart." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Thanks, Tom. I needed that." "Anytime," he said. "And Mark, no matter what you find, you'll get through it." Tom's words stayed with me as I tried to distract myself with household chores. Diane was out for the afternoon, running errands, or so she said. The empty house felt oppressive, every creak and shadow a reminder of the growing void between us. Unable to shake the feeling, I decided to look for more answers. Her laptop was in the study, a device she rarely used since her phone handled most of her needs. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lid. It felt invasive, a betrayal of the trust that had once been the cornerstone of our marriage. But hadn't she betrayed me first? I opened it and found her email account already logged in. My heart raced as I scrolled through the inbox, each subject line an opportunity for vindication or further doubt. Most of it was mundane, newsletters, work-related correspondence, reminders for charity events. Then I found it, a thread with the subject line, "Catch up soon?" The sender was a James R., and the messages were friendly but ambiguous. They talked about meeting for coffee, catching up after so long, and reminiscing about shared experiences. There was no explicit mention of an affair, but the tone felt too familiar, too warm. My stomach churned as I read the last message. "Looking forward to seeing you again soon. Same place as before?" I slammed the laptop shut, my chest heaving. The evidence wasn't damning, but it was enough to make my doubts feel justified. I needed to know more. That evening, Diane returned home carrying shopping bags and a cheery demeanor. She kissed my cheek as she passed, the scent of her perfume sharp and unfamiliar. "Busy day?" I asked, watching her carefully. "Oh, just running around town," she replied. "You know how Sundays are." Her answer was too breezy, too rehearsed. I wanted to press her, to mention the receipt or the emails, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded and let the conversation drift to safer topics. The following day, my doubts reached a boiling point. Diane had left early, claiming she had a meeting downtown. I called the hotel listed on the receipt, my hands trembling as I dialed. "Denton Suites, how can I help you?" a receptionist answered. "I'm trying to confirm a reservation," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Room 214, last Tuesday." There was a brief pause as the receptionist checked. "Yes, that room was booked under James R. Would you like me to connect you to his room?" "No, thank you," I said quickly, hanging up. My suspicions were no longer whispers. They were screams. As I sat in the car outside the hotel that afternoon, I debated going inside. The thought of confronting James, or worse, Diane, sent a chill down my spine. But I couldn't turn back now. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Don't wait up. Running late with the committee. Love you." The message felt like a mockery, a thin veil over the truth. Gathering my courage, I entered the lobby. I asked the receptionist if James was in, under the guise of returning something he'd left. She checked the records and frowned. "I'm sorry, sir, but he's already checked out. He left a forwarding address, though. Would you like it?" My pulse quickened. "Yes, please." She handed me a slip of paper with an address scrawled on it. It was a residential building across town. When I arrived at the address, the building was quiet, its facade worn but well kept. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I needed to understand what Diane had been hiding. As I stood outside, the door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, sharply dressed, with a confident air. He paused when he saw me, his expression guarded. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. "I'm looking for James," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "You found him. And you are?" I hesitated, the truth heavy on my tongue. "Mark, Diane's husband." James's face shifted, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. "Maybe we should talk," he said. As I followed him inside, my heart pounded. Whatever lay ahead, it was too late to turn back now. James's apartment was small, but tastefully furnished. A faint aroma of coffee lingered in the air as I stepped inside, trying to keep my nerves in check. My pulse raced as I surveyed the space, searching for clues that might connect him to Diane. A photograph on the mantel caught my eye, a younger James, smiling beside a woman and a small child. The family resemblance was clear, but the frame was slightly dusty, as though it hadn't been touched in years. "Sit," James offered, gesturing to a chair near the window. His voice was calm, but his eyes studied me carefully. I hesitated but sat down, clutching the armrests as though they might anchor me to reality. "So," he began, leaning against the wall, "you're Diane's husband." "Yes." My voice sounded foreign to my ears, flat, detached. "And you're?" James folded his arms, a sigh escaping his lips. "An old friend. From college." The words felt rehearsed, like a line in a play he'd performed a dozen times before. My doubts flared anew. "I see," I said evenly. "And this friendship, does it involve secret hotel rooms?" James flinched, just barely, but enough for me to catch it. His composure cracked, and I pressed harder. "I found the receipt," I continued, my voice rising. "Your name, your room. Same day Diane claimed she was at a committee meeting. Care to explain?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, struggling for words. Finally, he said, "Look, I don't know what Diane's told you, but it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded, the anger bubbling over. "Because it looks a hell of a lot like an affair." James sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We're not having an affair. I swear." "Then why meet in secret? Why lie about it?" My frustration boiled into my words. "What are you hiding?" James hesitated, his gaze shifting toward the window. "It's complicated. Diane asked me for advice, personal advice, about something she couldn't discuss with you." "Advice about what?" I snapped. He hesitated again, then leaned closer, lowering his voice as though the walls might be listening. "She's planning something, a surprise. For you." The air seemed to leave the room all at once. "What kind of surprise?" "I can't tell you that," James said, shaking his head. "She swore me to secrecy. All I can say is that it's something big, something important." My mind spun, grasping at his words. A surprise? It didn't align with the texts, the packed bag, the perfume. Still, the conviction in James's voice gave me pause. Was I wrong? Had I misread everything? That evening, I returned home with James's words echoing in my head. Diane greeted me with her usual warmth, her smile disarming as she set the table for dinner. For a moment, I considered confronting her, laying out everything I knew. But James's explanation hung over me like a shield, protecting her from my suspicions. As we ate, Diane's laughter felt genuine, her conversation effortless. She even suggested a date night, something we hadn't done in months. It was the kind of gesture I'd been longing for, and I wanted desperately to believe her intentions were pure. Still, the doubt lingered, like a splinter I couldn't remove. Over the next few days, I tried to let go of my suspicions. Diane's behavior seemed flawless, too flawless. She was more attentive, more affectionate, as though she sensed the distance that had grown between us and was determined to bridge it. One evening, she surprised me with a box of my favorite chocolates. "I saw these and thought of you," she said, her eyes warm. "Thanks," I murmured, guilt tightening in my chest. If James was right, if Diane truly was planning something for me, my doubts felt like a betrayal of their own. But just as I began to relax, A new discovery yanked me back into the vortex of uncertainty. It was a Thursday afternoon when I found the envelope. Diane had left for another committee meeting, and I decided to tidy the house to keep my mind occupied. While clearing out a drawer in the study, I came across it, a plain, unmarked envelope tucked beneath a stack of papers. Inside were 2 tickets to a luxury spa retreat, along with a handwritten note. Looking forward to spending time together. Jay. My heart sank as I read the note over and over. The tickets were for this upcoming weekend, a trip Diane hadn't mentioned. And James? My mind screamed for answers, but none came. I placed the envelope back where I found it, my hands trembling. The explanation James had given me, the surprise he'd insisted upon, it felt like a carefully constructed lie. Yet, if Diane was planning a getaway with James, why had she hidden the tickets in plain sight? Was she testing me? Mocking me? When Diane returned that evening, I couldn't meet her gaze. She kissed my cheek and asked about my day, her tone light and cheerful. I mumbled a response, the weight of the envelope pressing down on my thoughts. The next morning, I resolved to take action. If Diane was hiding something, I would find it. As she prepared to leave for another meeting, I followed her car at a safe distance, my heart pounding with each turn she took. She drove across town, eventually pulling into a parking lot near a cafe. I watched from my car as she entered the cafe, scanning the room before settling at a corner table. Moments later, James appeared, greeting her with a hug that lingered just a second too long. They sat close, their heads bent together as they spoke in hushed tones. I stayed in the car, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. The cafe's windows obscured their expressions, but their body language spoke volumes. This wasn't a casual meeting. It was intimate, conspiratorial. When Diane finally left, her face was lit with a smile, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. My chest ached as I watched her drive away, leaving me to grapple with the devastating truth. Back at home, I confronted the envelope again, holding the tickets like they might offer some explanation. My resolve hardened as I realized what I had to do. Diane would be away for most of the day, and I needed answers now more than ever. I packed an overnight bag and booked a room at the same spa listed on the tickets, determined to see for myself what Diane and James had planned. If she was hiding something, there would be no escaping it this time. The trip was set for the following day. As I lay in bed that night, Diane sleeping soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions. Whatever awaited me at the retreat, it would either shatter my doubts or confirm my worst fears. Either way, the truth would finally come to light. The spa retreat stood against the serene backdrop of a dense forest, a place designed to promise tranquility and rejuvenation. But as I parked my car and approached the grand entrance, my heart pounded with anything but calm. The truth I sought lay beyond these doors, and I was determined to find it. I checked in under Diane's reservation, my voice steady despite the storm raging within me. The receptionist handed me the keycard with a polite smile, unaware of the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Room 214. The same number that had haunted my thoughts for weeks. The suite was immaculate, as luxurious as one would expect for a place like this. Fresh flowers adorned the table near the window, and a bottle of champagne rested in a bucket of ice. The room exuded a sense of intimacy that made my stomach churn. I searched every corner, looking for something that would confirm my worst fears. The closets held nothing out of the ordinary, and the drawers were empty save for the hotel's standard amenities. Frustrated, I sank into an armchair, my eyes fixed on the door. Hours passed. I questioned myself, my resolve wavering with each tick of the clock. But when the door handle finally turned, all hesitation vanished, replaced by a cold determination to uncover the truth. Diane entered first, laughing softly as she turned to someone behind her. Then he appeared, James. They were close, too close, his hand lingering on her lower back as the door clicked shut. They froze when they saw me, their smiles vanishing as if a mask had been ripped away. Diane's eyes widened in shock, her face pale. "Mark," she gasped, clutching her bag as if it could shield her from the confrontation that loomed. James's jaw tightened, and he took a half step forward, like he was trying to position himself between us. This isn't what it looks like, he said, his voice firm but unconvincing. Don't, I snapped, my voice razor sharp. Don't insult my intelligence. I followed the crumbs. I know exactly what this is. Diane stammered, her usual composure crumbling. I can explain. Explain? I barked, rising to my feet. Explain the hotel receipts? The emails? The damn spa retreat? Go ahead, Diane. I'm all ears. Her eyes filled with tears, but her silence spoke louder than any words. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. The truth hung heavy in the air, undeniable and suffocating. Diane's betrayal was no longer a shadow lurking at the edges of my mind. It was a glaring reality, laid bare before me. I never meant to hurt you, she finally said, her voice trembling. I didn't know how to tell you that I felt lost. Lost? I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. You were lost, so you found yourself in another man's arms? That's your excuse? She flinched, but James stepped in, his tone firm. Mark, this wasn't about you. Diane needed something I could give her. I rounded on him, my anger erupting like a volcano. You stay out of this. You don't get to tell me what my wife needed. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to choke. Diane's tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't summon the sympathy I once would have. Not now, not after everything. I turned to her, my voice cold and measured. How long? She hesitated, her lips quivering before she whispered, a few months. My stomach twisted, the confirmation a dagger to the heart. A few months, I echoed. All that time, lying to my face, acting like everything was fine. I didn't want to hurt you, she said again, as if the repetition could lessen the blow. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. Her words were a pathetic echo in my ears, hollow and meaningless. I looked at James, his face stoic, as if he believed he'd done nothing wrong. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Mark, Diane began, but I cut her off. Both of you. Get out. Now. James hesitated, but the fire in my eyes must have convinced him. He grabbed his coat and left without another word, leaving Diane and me alone in the suffocating silence. She reached for me, her hands trembling. Mark, please. Let me explain. Let me fix this. I stepped back, her touch repelling me. Fix it? I said, laughing bitterly. There's no fixing this, Diane. You made your choice. Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to care. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had destroyed it all. And for what? A fleeting thrill? A momentary escape from reality? I never stopped loving you, she cried. I swear, Mark. I love you. Don't, I said, my voice breaking. Don't you dare use that word. Love doesn't do this. Love doesn't betray. She collapsed onto the bed, her sobs echoing in the room. I turned away, my chest hollow and aching, and walked toward the door. The last thing I said before leaving was quiet but resolute. You killed us, Diane. There's nothing left. The door closed behind me with a finality that left no room for doubt. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of her betrayal pressed down on me. But beneath the pain, a flicker of clarity emerged. This chapter of my life was over, and though the road ahead would be difficult, it was mine to walk alone. As I drove away, the retreat fading into the distance, I allowed myself one last glance in the rearview mirror. The man I saw staring back wasn't the same. He was broken, but not defeated. Betrayed, but not lost. It was time to start over.